To start this one, you're going to fold your paper in half. These are 11.5 by 11.5 squares. You can measure and find the center if you would rather not have the folds, but we will heat press these once we get them going, so you'll be able to get them pretty flat again. We're going to fold it in half both directions, and then you're going to do diagonals. So when you do the diagonal, you just want to go from one corner to the other. So we're going to line it up. And we're going to start in the center and go out. When you're folding these, everything should be going to the same point in the center here. If it's not, if you have a weird little extra triangle shape in there, stop and figure out why. Either your paper is not quite the right size or your folds are not quite right, and get it fixed at the beginning. That way when you get started here, you have 8 triangles that are all the same size, because that will just make your life a lot easier. So in the center, I'm going to just draw over these lines so you guys can see them. The lines should all be intersecting right in the center and just have no extra space. Next, we need a piece of tracing paper. If you haven't used tracing paper before, keep in mind that it's not special.
Oh, yeah,
it's just thin paper.
Oh, yeah, we're not going to do this.
So, we only really need it to be a little bit bigger than our triangle. So, I kind of estimate here. Just need it to be about that size. Don't cut it, like we don't want it to be exactly the same size as the triangle. You do want it to be a little bit bigger so that you have extra space around it, just to make it easier to hold it down. So I'm going to find the corners. Start here in the center. Then I'm going to do this corner.
Isn't this kind of like wax paper?
Well, you weren't in the room because you took your Chromebook back to your locker, but we did talk about that. So if you did at a similar assignment last year, you'll get the choice of changing yours up and adding an insect or an animal instead of a word. But if you haven't done it before, you're just going to use your name with bubble letters or block letters. So this is my triangle. This should be the same size as all 8 of these. So now inside of here, let's see, I'm going to do a teacher who's new to the building this year. So who's new this year?
Mr. Gifford?
Mr. Lanning, Mr. Gifford. I think let's do Mr. Lanning. So I'm going to do bubble letters or block letters. You can do capital letters, or you can switch it up between capital and lowercase. Let's see, L-A-N-N-I-N-G. Yeah. Okay. If you have not practiced bubble letters or block letters, remember you can always start with just like a little skeleton letter and then add on to it. You're going to trace whatever you put on here 8 times. So if you don't like it this first time, try again. Don't just start tracing it, because you're probably not going to start liking it better when you do it more. The first thing I need to decide before I start tracing is, do I want this to be the middle with all the G's connecting and kind of like a little complicated knot shape in the middle? Or do I want the L to be in the middle and have just kind of a big open octagon? And I think this would be way more interesting. So I'm going to put the G's in the middle. So graphite is on this side, meaning that I need to flip it over so the graphite is touching the paper. Put the center in the center. Put the corners on the corners. Make sure you're on point before you start tracing. And then just trace carefully right on top of the graphite lines. Regular pencil does work a little bit better for this than mechanical pencil. Just got to kind of keep sharpening it so that it stays nice and clean. But it definitely, you can push down harder without it snapping. And you want to be able to push down because you want that graphite that's on the other side to be left behind on your paper. When I said tracing paper is not special, the reason I say that is because every once in a while I have someone bring me their paper and they're like, no matter how many times I trace it, it's not going through. But the graphite does not go through the tracing paper. The pushing hard is really truly just so that the graphite you already left on this side is pushing down onto the paper. You could do anything the same way we do the tracing paper, like any piece of paper. You could put graphite on one side, and no matter how many times we draw this, it's not going to go through the paper. But if we flip it over and we trace on the back side where those lines are, it's going to leave a mark. And that's all we're doing with the tracing paper. It's just thinner so we can see exactly where those lines are a little bit easier. But just something to think about, just something to keep in mind. If you're having trouble, ask yourself, do I need to flip it over? Is the graphite touching the paper? So if it's not, you're really making this impossible. Okay, so we're going to pretend I did all of them here. And I'm going to flip it over, keeping that in the middle, keeping my G's always facing the center. Flipping it over so now that there's graphite on this side as well, so I can trace it on over here. Put my corners in the corners, including this one. And you'll also be able to see that the letters should be touching, like, so my L here, the top of my L on this one will touch the top of the L on that one. So it'll create a new little shape in here. And so as you keep going with this, you'll kind of lose your letters and they'll just turn into an interesting shape that'll give you something fun to paint in, which is kind of all we're really doing. We're trying to give ourselves a fun design so that we can talk about how to paint and how, like, kind of our painting procedures and what I want you to do when we paint. So it's just giving us a fun, easy design to get started so that you can have something to paint in. So, does anybody have any questions about this part? So, if you did your name last year and you don't want to do another word, or let's say you did your first name, you could do your last name, but if you wanted to try something different, if you want to try something like a step up, then the next step is to try and draw like an insect or an animal. This is not what we're doing at this time. You're listening and thinking, and if you have questions, you ask them at the end, okay? So, if you're going to try the next step, and you're going to draw, let's say, a panda in this little triangle, don't draw a symbol. We're not drawing panda bears that look like a bunch of circles. Just like I don't want a ladybug that looks like she's been squashed and has a million dots. These symbols are just like our stick people when we talked about how we need to move past the symbol. Same thing here. We're moving past these symbols. If you want to draw a panda, find a picture of a panda to look at. Take your time and do your best. Huh? No.
I can't draw. I actually suck at drawing.
And again, Chase, we're not doing that. Negative talk doesn't help anything, and we're not even discussing it right now. I'm telling you what my expectation is. And my expectation is that we are moving past symbols. This stuff is done. So if you have already done your first name, you can do your last name or vice versa. If you're ready to move past the words and you want to try something else, don't draw a symbol. Find a picture of it to draw. Again though, keep it inside this triangle shape. Pick one of the corners to be your middle and keep it the same every time. Because this is a pretty easy assignment. The only time I really have kids that have to start over is if they're tracing and they have like G in the center for a bunch of them, and then all of a sudden they switch and put L in the center, so then it doesn't match up. So whatever your center is, keep it the same every single time, and then it'll all match up and you'll be ready to go to the next step. So, does any